Hello and welcome to Everyday Medicine. I'm Dr. Luke, and I'd like to thank you for joining me on this podcast series where we share conversations with colleagues exploring their special interests in medicine and bringing insights, ideas and advice which I hope will be applicable for our medical practices. In this episode, we're talking with an expert scientist on sleep hygiene. And for Australian audiences, listening does give you eligibility for your CPD, so log in and add this as an activity. You may also consider journaling, reflection, and adding to the review and performance section in your CPD. Well, the pace of modern life may not give many of us time to stop, rest, and recover with a good night's sleep. Yet, sleep is as important for good health as diet and exercise. Regular, healthy sleep improves brain performance, mood, and health. Poor sleep hygiene is associated with increased risk of heart disease, stroke, obesity, impaired immune, and cognitive function. Sleep consists of two distinct states as shown by EEG recordings, including REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, where dreaming occurs, and non-REM sleep, which is divided into 4 stages. Now, sleep is cyclical, with 4 or 5 REM periods during the night accounting for about a quarter of the total night's sleep. Initial REM periods are shorter than later REM periods. During REM sleep, information is believed to be cemented into memory. Stage 4 sleep is the deepest, during which blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing slow. Muscles tend to relax, and both growth and repair processes are believed to occur during this stage. Stage 4 usually occurs in the first several hours of sleep. Variations in sleep may be due to circumstances such as shift work or travel, or to idiosyncratic patterns. Creativity and rapidity of response to unfamiliar situations are both impaired by loss of sleep. Both alcohol and smoking, as well as taking stimulants such as caffeine, some cold remedies, and cocaine, decrease sleep time. Benzodiazepines tend to increase total sleep time with variable effects on non-REM sleep. Antidepressants tend to decrease REM sleep with rebound on withdrawal in the form of nightmares. Well, for most adults, 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep is recommended. A little less for more senior adults, and more, perhaps 8 to 11 hours, for teenagers, and more still for infants and toddlers. Sleep dysfunction, however, is common and refers to either short sleeps, less than 6 hours for those under 65 years and 5 hours for older adults. Long sleep, that's longer than recommended. Poor sleep quality, including waking frequently or taking too long to fall to sleep. And disorders such as sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, and insomnia. Doctor-diagnosed sleep disorders occur in about 1 in 5 adults, and 48% of adult Australians report at least 2 sleep-related problems, with up to 19% reporting not getting enough sleep. Shift workers, accounting for about 16% of the Australian working population, are at high risk of sleep problems, with as many as 1 in 3 shift workers experiencing sleep disorder, including falling asleep at work and having a 60% higher risk of accidents compared to non-shift workers. An Australian survey of 1,050 adults revealed that sleeping pills were used in 37%. 14% were using melatonin, whilst the majority were taking a range of hypnotics, including benzodiazepines and non-benzodiazepine products like zopiclone from the cyclical group or the orexin receptor antagonists. I wondered if this high level of prescribing was an indication that our general approach to advising patients on healthy sleep should change in favour of promoting more natural ways at achieving sleep hygiene. And to satisfy my curiosity about sleep and to gain insights into a healthy sleep pattern and how to achieve this naturally, we're joined by senior research scientist Josh Leota from Monash University's School of Psychological Sciences. Josh is actively involved in sleep research, especially with the effects of sleep on athletic performance, and is currently researching this with a cohort of elite female athletes competing locally and after travelling through time zones interstate. I was very pleased to welcome Josh to give us some smart insights into understanding sleep cycles, how poor sleep patterns may impact upon health, and advice on ways to achieve sleep without pharmacological assistance. Please welcome Josh to the podcast. So, Josh Leota, thank you very much for joining me on Everyday Medicine. It's a great privilege for me to have you here as a guest to talk about sleep. It's a very big issue. And from my reading, 48% of adult Australians report at least 2 sleep-related problems, and up to 19% report they just don't sleep enough. I'm probably one of those. And I was a bit surprised to also read, not in general practice, so I don't tend to prescribe sleeping pills, but up to 37% of adults tend to use some sort of pharmacological method to help them sleep. and that's split between pills 23% and melatonin 14%. So it's clearly a very big problem. So, it's a great privilege for me to have you here to sort of to illuminate us on all things sleep, Josh. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? You're a research fellow at University of Monash. Take us through how you got into this field, and then I'd like to quiz you a little bit on sleep and how we should be conducting it.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Luke. It's great to be here. I took a somewhat unconventional path into sleep and circadian research. I studied philosophy initially in my undergraduate degree in New Zealand, and then moved over to Canada, where I studied social psychology and neuroscience. And then the pandemic hit, and we unfortunately or fortunately had to move back over to this side of the world. And I'd always had this, I guess, deep curiosity about sleep, both in my research. During my time in Canada, I was looking at high arousal states like anxious experiences and stressful situations, and I always saw sleep as kind of the other end of that neurophysiological spectrum. And I was lucky enough to come across a PhD program at Monash University, run by Dr. Elise Facer-Charles, who at the time and still is working with elite athletes, tracking their sleep and circadian rhythms and trying to develop ways to optimize sleep to help improve performance. So that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years now, working with professional athletes, but as well the general public, trying to come up with non-pharmacological interventions and ways to improve sleep to ultimately help not just performance, but health in the long run. So that's my journey to where we are today.
People are going to want to know your secrets, I think, Josh, aren't they? Have you got AFL sportsmen that are tapping in at the AIS? Who's tapping in at the moment to this? Because it seems like it's a very important subject.
Yeah, I think sleep is at that point where everyone is really interested in it. It's the word's starting to get out how important this is for performance. We often say it's one of the most important legal performance enhancers that we have available to us. So we've had a lot of buy-in from many different sports, including the AFL clubs in Melbourne here, the NRL. We're currently working with a WNBL team, the Southside Flyers, female basketball team, and that's going great. And as well, Elise works with many different sports teams as well as individual sports people. So yeah, I think everyone is really interested in figuring out how we can solve or at least improve this problem. Like you mentioned in your intro, it really is a pretty widespread problem, getting sufficient sleep. It's great to be a part of it.
Well, tell us what happens during sleep, Josh. Can you summarise? I know that's a very big question, but can you summarise just the key things that seem to happen, which we understand seem to happen physiologically during sleep?
Yeah, it's a big question and one that's not fully answered yet, but I'll have a go. I personally, I see sleep as quite a complex and multi-dimensional set of physiological processes, and these are essential not just for survival, which is what we thought of for a long time, but also to the degree that one can thrive in pretty much every area of human experience. And this is because sleep, it's characterized not just by an altered consciousness and a reduced interaction with the environment. These things are kind of obvious, decreased sensory activity. But these characteristics, they allow our brain and body time and resources to perform these critical functions that are essential to daytime functioning. So physical restoration at pretty much every level of the body, the repair and recovery of tissue, the development of human growth hormone, and then as well the cognitive benefits. So cognitive processing, such as memory consolidation and learning. Sleep is extremely vital for these processes, yes. As well as a whole host of other, hormonal regulation, yes. Homeostatic functions. So sleep, it happens in stages, it happens in cycles, and these different stages are important for different parts of our physiological functioning. And I think people are becoming aware of the fact that, we need to sleep, but they may not be aware just yet of how important it is to pretty much every section of health and performance and well-being. So, still a big unanswered question, but we're making our way there.
Whenever I feel sick, whenever I feel viral, the one thing I want to do is just close my eyes and sleep. You kind of know intuitively that that's how you heal. When animals are unwell, they lie down, they tend to sleep. We just know this is where the healing really seems to kick in. We
intuit that. I think we also have evolved a sense to move towards that kind of behavior because it seems to be the best for us in those states. So we just need to listen to our bodies often. Yes. is the hardest part.
Josh, can you run quickly through those phases of sleep that have been described? Just a thumbnail sketch of what they are and what happens during them.
Of course. So the two most important stages for restorative sleep would be your slow wave sleep, often referred to as deep sleep, or N3, so non-REM sleep. This often happens at the start of the sleep cycle and predominantly happens at the start of the night. And this is extremely important for your physical restoration. So it's when 99% of your human growth hormone is produced. It's important for tissue repair and recovery. For elite athletes, it's a really important stage, particularly following heavy training loads and competitions the day before. It's really important that they get a good amount of deep sleep. And then on the other side of things, you have REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. This is commonly thought of as the stage where we dream, and it's extremely important for cognition, memory consolidation. It's when our brains look under EEG, look the most like when we're awake. Sleep used to be thought of as an absence of neural activity, but we've since realized that that's not the case. In fact, our brains are very active, yes, particularly during REM, and this often happens at the end of the sleep period, right before you wake up. That may be because why some people often feel like they wake up from a dream is because they were just in REM sleep. So both very important for different processes, but it's really important to get a lot of both, and as much as you can, particularly as you age, because when you get older, your total sleep duration decreases, but also the proportion of time you spend in these most important phases of sleep also starts to decline. So a lot of researchers are working currently on ways to enhance slow wave sleep, enhance REM sleep, and or at least trying to avoid the behaviors that can be detrimental to these stages. For example, alcohol is a big one. Alcohol seems to really deplete the amount of REM sleep that people get. So these are the kinds of things that we're considering when thinking about sleep staging. Yeah. That's the architecture of sleep.
Yeah. How much sleep do we need, Josh? Well, what's considered to be a healthy, sleep hygiene?
So most public health recommendations and public guidelines around the world recommend between 7 and 9 hours of sleep, and it's important to think of that as actual sleep. So not just the time that you spend in bed, because sometimes you're in bed, you're awake, but that's the time you spend asleep. Now there's huge individual differences in how much time everyone needs to sleep. And one of the best ways to figure this out is just to think about how you feel after a certain night of sleep. Do you feel tired? Well, it's likely you didn't get enough sleep the night before. But it's important to remember that although these are just guidelines, there's a lot of variability between people. But where there is a lot less variability is down the lower end of the spectrum. Almost everyone needs at least 7 hours of sleep. And in the past, people have talked about some people only needing, 3 or 4 hours of sleep.
Yeah.
The research on that just doesn't agree. From what I've read, the percentage of people who can perform optimally on small amounts of sleep is extremely small. So in general, I would be aiming for 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But listen to your body. If you feel like that's not enough, it may not be enough, and you may need to sleep a little bit longer. If you're sleeping, much longer than that, 11, 12 hours, and anything less than that, you're feeling still sleepy during the day, I would definitely recommend seeing a sleep physician because there's likely something else going on there.
Some other condition going on, yeah, it could be thyroid disease or some other physical condition. I think people that they kind of boast that they can get around with 3 or 4 hours sleep, and you do read about this. I suspect they might do that once or twice in a week, but they can't back that up on a regular basis without becoming sick. That's what I suspect. Maybe they have naps during the day as well. I'm not quite sure, but yes, I've often wondered about how they cope. There seems to be a difference between younger people, teenagers, and older people, maybe younger, needing more sleep. Would you agree with that? Is that just is that a sound observation, or is it just that teenagers a bit lazy, like to sleep in?
No, I mean, they may be lazy, but that's definitely not the only reason they're sleeping in. They do, in fact, need a lot more sleep. This is a crucial developmental time, and part of that is happening while you're asleep. So we do see across epidemiological work that younger people do need to sleep more. They also have a delayed circadian phase, so they're often getting up later and going to sleep later. And this is a really important issue because I think a lot of people see teenagers who sleep in before school and really struggle to get up and get to that 7 a.m., 8 a.m. class as like you said, being lazy or unmotivated. It's just likely not the case. It's their biological rhythms trying to make them stay asleep for longer. And it's something you see universally across the board. And it is one reason why there's this big push for later school time starts, to give these adolescents enough time to sleep, because they're going to sleep later. They need to be able to sleep in. This is what their body clock is naturally telling them to do. And in the end, they're going to perform much better at school. They're going to be more motivated, going to be less sleep deprived, and hopefully healthier as a result. So definitely age-related changes throughout the lifespan. You see as you get older into later stages of life, you start to sleep less as well. And this is different for men and women. So there are different, and this is kind of obvious due to, for example, the process of menopause. You see sleep changes during that process as well. So it's a really good point. It's something that researchers really need to consider when they're analyzing a lot of different people, different ages, different sexes, to be able to control for these age-related changes and different relationships between the sexes with respect to age and sleep.
It's fascinating. What? Just tell us a little bit about the sort of chronic conditions that might be associated with sleep disorders. Perhaps where the sleep disorder is the cause rather than the secondary effect of.
Yes. So I'd say that's quite a complex
question. I'm throwing you early ones here, Josh.
Yeah, well, the reason it's complex is because nearly all, so for example, psychiatric disorders, nearly all of them have a sleep and circadian outcome, a disruption to either the circadian system or a disruption to sleep. And whether that's the cause or a consequence of that psychiatric disorder, it's really difficult to tell. This is definitely not something that my research focuses on. But from what I understand, impaired sleep, both in the duration, but also the regularity of sleep. So when people aren't going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time on a consistent basis, when they have chronic irregularity in their sleep timing, this is associated with a whole host of different metabolic disorders, but also psychiatric disorders. In fact, and we can talk about this later, but sleep regularity is I think the number one most important consideration for sleep. And it's been shown to be a better predictor of all-cause mortality, a better predictor of cancer mortality and cardiometabolic disease than how long you're sleeping. So really, I think the answer is almost all disorders can be either directly caused or helped along the way by chronic impaired sleep. And chronic is the most important point. You know, our bodies are pretty resilient to the occasional night of sleep deprivation or the occasional irregularity in when we're going to sleep. We may have to stay up late one night or get up early one morning. But when that becomes chronic, when you have a consistent misalignment with your circadian rhythm and the outside world, so for example, shift work is a big one. this can lead to, again, a whole host of negative health outcomes.
But when you say regularity, do you mean going to bed at more or less the same time?
Exactly.
So having that sort of time, this is when I'm going to go to bed, this is when I'm going to get up. That's what you're referring to by regularity. Yeah.
Yes.
I don't follow that, unfortunately, which is terrible.
Yeah. Well, if I were to recommend anything, it would be that. It would be finding a consistent bedtime and wake time. And this is not just sleep. It's all to do with your circadian rhythm.
Yes.
Right? When you have irregular sleep-wake timings, this is likely going to be associated with irregular exposure to light, for example. So you're getting a lot of bright light at night, which is delaying your circadian rhythm. It's suppressing the production of melatonin, which is necessary for you to fall asleep, but then also it's dampening the amplitude of your circadian rhythm, and it's misaligning it the following days. And this is the same with not getting bright light during the day, which is, again, really important for strengthening that circadian rhythm and helping your sleep. It also leads to irregular exercise time and meal timings, for example, drinking caffeine late at night. All of these things are causing a disruption to your biological rhythms. And again, this is one of the worst things you can do for long-term health. In my opinion, at least, yeah.
So good light exposure during the day is also part of one of the key things.
Yes. As soon as you wake up, the best thing you can do is get outside and get in bright light. This resets your circadian rhythm. It tells your body that this is the time to be awake. It strengthens the amplitude as well, so you're going to feel more alert and more awake during the day, and more sleepy and less alert at night, which again is great. You just think about how we've evolved for millions and millions of years. We only had one source of light, and it was the sun, and it was very regular in its timing. It would come up during the day and go down at night. So we developed these biological mechanisms to optimize behavior during day and during night. Along comes the Industrial Revolution, the invention of the light bulb, and all of a sudden our day and night has completely changed. And this is only very brief if you think about the time span of human history. So now we have these bright nights, we have these dim days where we're inside under fluorescent light, and our bodies just haven't had enough time to evolve accordingly.
Yes.
And this is something that I think more people need to know about. The importance of circadian disruption and how it can really affect your long-term health.
No wonder we're all depressed and feeling miserable, particularly
Yeah.
we need to be working from home more. I'd find I'm very impatient if I don't sleep much, Josh. That's one of the first things that goes. I sort of feel myself just not being as patient with people around me, which is pretty terrible. But, the moment you feel sleepy, you get a bit grumpy, and the effects are that we all understand them and know them, don't we? I'd also like to explore what one of your interests is, the relationship between exercise and sleep. What has your research told us about that, Josh?
Yeah, this is what the majority of my PhD focused on. I think this relationship between exercise and sleep is fascinating. And for a long time, we've generally considered exercises as being beneficial for sleep. In fact, ever since the biblical times, they were talking about how sleep is sweet for the laboring man, and common wisdom will always tell you, the more your kids run around during the day, the better they're going to sleep that night. And I think this is generally true, but when we are dealing with public health guidelines and recommendations, I think we need to be a bit more nuanced in what we're recommending and when we're recommending it. And I think timing is the key. And I think about, at least my experience with professional athletes, when they have to compete late at night, so when their trainings or their games are late at night, they find it impossible to sleep. And that not just to get to sleep, but to maintain healthy sleep throughout the night, they're constantly waking up, finding it really, really difficult. And I mean, anecdotally, this is true. When I go for a late night run, I just lie in bed staring at the ceiling. You may have experienced the same thing, just unable to switch off. So this is something that I was really interested in. And when I started reading the literature, I was quite shocked that a number of systematic reviews and meta-analyses that have looked at the relationship between evening exercise and sleep found no relationship whatsoever. They concluded that actually evening exercise doesn't disrupt your sleep. This is something we used to think, but it's not really the case anymore. And this just went against everything that I'd experienced with these professional sports teams as well as myself. So I started reading the papers, and what I realized was that the exercise that they were prescribing was quite light in intensity, and it didn't demand this high cardiometabolic load that I think is the key. Because when I think about these athletes, they're an AFL game goes for 2 hours, and they're running as fast as they can and competing at the top level. So I thought, well, you know what, maybe the key is how strenuous the exercise is. So what we did is we teamed up with Whoop, W-H-O-O-P. It's a consumer wearable tech company in the United States. It's similar to a Fitbit. It's a wearable device that tracks your sleep and your exercise using PPG. So it tracks heart rate, but it's very, very good at determining whether you're asleep or awake. And you wear it while you exercise, so it's constantly measuring heart rate levels and how long you're in certain heart rate zones.
Is it measuring movement too, Josh? It
is, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes, it's got an accelerometer in there as well.
Right,
And it performs really well against gold standard ECG for heart rate, but then also against polysomnography for sleep-wake categorization.
Yeah.
And what we did is we analyzed data sleep and exercise data from about 15,000 of their users across the span of a year. So this resulted in, I think, 4.5 million nights of data. So a really, really large, really large data set. And what we found was this very clear dose-response relationship between the timing of exercise and also the strain of exercise on subsequent sleep. So let me break this down for you a little bit. When exercise finished more than 4 hours before bedtime, it had no effect on sleep, both sleep duration, timing, and quality. However, when people finished exercising within that 4 hours, the later they got, so the closer they finished that exercise to bedtime, the more of a disruption it had on their sleep and their nocturnal autonomic activity, so their resting heart rate, their heart rate variability during sleep. And this was particularly true for strenuous exercise. So as the exercise strain went up, the disruption to sleep and heart rate also increased. And this was a really fascinating thing to see. And no one had looked at this kind of interaction before between the timing and the strain of sleep. So one way to think about this is if you compare it to a night where you didn't exercise at all, engaging in strenuous exercise, let's say similar to a 10 to 15 kilometer run, for example, engaging in this kind of exercise 2 hours before when you typically go to sleep, this was associated with a 40-minute delay in when you were able to go to sleep, a 30-minute reduction in how long you slept that night, and a pretty significant reduction in sleep quality across the night. It also increased resting heart rate by, I think, 4.5 beats per minute, which is, it's a significant figure. If you think about the average resting heart rate of a 40-year-old male being around 60 beats per minute, an increase of almost 5 beats per minute is pretty significant.
Right,
and it
that's right through their sleep, is it?
That's right through, yeah. So that's a measure taken during their deep sleep period, which is when your resting heart rate is at its lowest.
Yes.
And also we saw this reduction in heart rate variability, which is basically a measure of the balance or adaptability of your autonomic nervous system. So higher resting heart rate and lower HIV at night suggests that strenuous exercise may be, causing this sustained residual sympathetic activity. So the sympathetic activation during exercise, ideally you want this to dissipate and you want the parasympathetic nervous system to reactivate before bedtime, because that's key for getting good rest and recovery. However, we were finding that what it looks like is happening is the sympathetic nervous system is still activated, and because of this intense and strenuous period of exercise late at night, the people these participants just didn't have the time to reactivate that parasympathetic activation to have that sympathetic withdrawal. And this was really impacting their sleep. So I think for me, those findings were fascinating. And in fact, that was just 2 hours before bedtime. If you look at exercises that happen 2 hours after when people are typically going to sleep, the disruptions to sleep and autonomic activity get exponentially worse.
I see.
And this doesn't happen too often, but when you've got a data set this large, you do have enough to analyze. And if you think about NBA basketball players who are playing very late at night, Australian Open tennis, sometimes you see games going well into 3 a.m., 4 a.m.
Yes.
Here in Melbourne. This is extremely relevant for these types of athletes because these evening competitions, they may be jeopardizing sleep and recovery on nights when it is needed the most, particularly during a competition like the Australian Open, where they're having to back up a few days later, and they're not finishing their games until 3 a.m. So, I was really, really excited about this particular paper, and I think, I hope it manages to at least inform some guidelines around what kind of exercise is okay before sleep.
Well, it's very helpful to know, and also for practitioners maybe who are dealing with patients that aren't sleeping well, just a question about when they're exercising. I wonder if you've seen a little spike in cardiac events in these patients. Was the data set big enough to see if there were more ischemic heart events through the night?
No, unfortunately, we didn't have that kind of level of data to look at changes in heart rate at that degree. We just had more summary data at the daily level about their heart rate at a particular point in time. But I think that would be fascinating to see, particularly for those who are chronically exercising at night and not maintaining a healthy sleep-wake schedule. I think so you'd be onto something there.
Right, so no sooner than 4 hours before the scheduled sleep time. I was interested to know if you were observing the sort of sleep times and then the performance of the athletes. I'm sure that's something you're looking at. Has that something that you have data on? That you're recommending this sort of sleep hygiene, we call it, to professional sports people. Are you observing a difference in their performance?
We are, and we're seeing not just that higher quality sleep and longer sleep duration is associated with better performance the next day, but specific to the individual, if they're sleeping in line with their biological rhythms, then they seem to perform better the next day. And I'll go one step further. One of the most fascinating findings in this area, I think, was that if you look at somebody's, we call it chronotype or a circadian phenotype, when their body is ideally wanting to go to sleep. We've heard of kind of morning birds and late owls.
Yes.
This type of thing. What you'll find is certain chronotypes, certain groups of people will perform better at different times of the day based on their internal biological pace compared to others. So we find that the early types are much better at performing early in the day and throughout midday, and then you see a drop off in performance as you get later on into the night. Whereas the late types, you see that they really struggle at performing earlier on in the day and are much better at performing late at night. And further, what my supervisor, Dr. Lee's FACER trials has looked at is whether we can use non-pharmacological interventions to shift people's internal circadian phase to be able to perform better at certain scheduled times, because once you get to a certain level of competition, these times are fixed because of broadcasting rights and that kind of thing. So there's really nothing you can do to change the schedule, but what you could do is change your biology. And you can do this by your exposure to light, your exposure to when you exercise and when you eat. And she found that you can shift, not a huge amount, but you can shift people's circadian rhythms slightly so that they can perform better at certain times of the day, which is, I think, a really fascinating thing and something that professional sports teams will start to look into a bit more.
Yes, I agree with you. I've often wondered about that with swimmers getting up so early to train in the morning, but often their competitions in professional levels are quite late. I think, gosh, they're kind of, their body clock's not really in sync with when they really have to provide their maximum performance. So that's fascinating. Do you have any tips and clues for like non-pharmacological methods that we could give our patients that may help them to fall asleep?
Yes. So, I mean, I've harped on about this for a bit now, but I think regularity really is the most important thing you can do.
That's
so going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time, and then connected to that is your exposure to light, making sure you're getting the timing of that correct. So as soon as you wake up, get in as much natural bright light as you can. This will reset your circadian rhythms. And then at nighttime, try your very best to stay in as dark, I guess seek out darkness at night, particularly 2 to 3 hours before you want to go to sleep. This is when you want to put the devices away, turn the lights off, or at least turn them down if you can, and start to seek out darkness, because what we need is for our bodies to produce melatonin in order for us to fall asleep. The one thing that suppresses that more than anything is bright light, particularly blue light. So if you can avoid light at night, you're going to find it a lot easier to fall asleep. And they would be probably the two most important non-pharmacological, or actually two most important suggestions, regardless of whether they're non-pharmacological or not. Caffeine is another really important consideration. Mm-hmm. So we ran a study a few years ago, led by Dr. Carissa Gardner at Australian Catholic University in Brisbane. She ran this really beautiful placebo-controlled, randomized controlled trial that looked at the effect of a typical dose of caffeine, a high dose of caffeine, consumed in the morning, afternoon, and evening, and its effect on sleep. And what she found was the lower dose. So this was about 100 milligrams, so your typical cup of coffee. This had limited effects on sleep, even when it was consumed 4 hours before bedtime. Whereas the higher dose, which was 400 milligrams, the equivalent of 4 coffees or 2 energy drinks. These pre-workout supplements sometimes have 300 to 400 milligrams of caffeine. This condition caused notable disruptions to sleep. It delayed sleep onset, it reduced sleep quality, it increased the amount of wake that people were experiencing during their sleep period, and it increased the amount of time it took people to fall asleep. And this was even when that higher dose was consumed 12 hours before sleep. So it's really important to consider how much coffee you're drinking or caffeine you're drinking and when you're drinking it. One smaller coffee, it's probably okay, at least 4 hours before sleep. But if you're going to consume a lot more caffeine, you really want to be doing that in the morning and tapering off as you go throughout the day, because it can really affect your sleep, and then you feel fatigued the next day and you reach for more caffeine and you fall into this vicious cycle. So caffeine timing is really important. I think timing is the underlying message here. Timing of certain behaviors, timing of exercise, timing of caffeine intake, timing of light exposure, all of these things are really important for sleep. And one last one I'll mention is temperature. So this is kind of like the next frontier of sleep research, I think, is how can we manipulate or regulate temperature to increase the ability to fall asleep? And what we're finding consistently is that we need cold to be able to fall asleep. Our brain and our body needs to drop about 1 degree centigrade to be able to fall asleep. So when we find ourselves in a room that's too hot, we're really going to struggle to initiate sleep, but then to also stay asleep. So making sure your bedroom is cold and around about 18 to 19 degrees seems to be the optimal ambient temperature. And this will allow your core body temperature to drop and facilitate sleep. There are now these temperature regulating mattresses that are very expensive, but very cool. They have these kind of veins of water running throughout them, and they can regulate the temperature of your mattress throughout the night. That's a really cool
Have you
innovation.
got one of those, Josh?
I don't.
You should be trialing it. They should be giving you a trial.
Yeah, I should reach out to them. One thing I found that works anecdotally anyway is a hot shower before bed. And this sounds kind of counterintuitive.
Yes.
But if you think about a hot shower, this raises your skin temperature and causes vasodilation, so especially in your hands and your feet. And as blood flows, or as blood flow increases to your skin, heat kind of dissipates more effectively and and this leads to a subsequent cooling of the core body temperature. And it's not the being cold that is essential for sleep, it's the cooling that is really important for sleep. So quite counterintuitively, I guess, but a hot shower before bed can help, as long as your room is cold enough to facilitate that drop in temperature after that.
We've got regularity, we've got exercising early, we've got the light early, we've got a hot shower, no espresso martinis.
Yes.
Tell us a bit about melatonin. Does it work, Josh? Is it, is it well backed up by studies? What's your take on that? Exogenous melatonin.
Yes. So exogenous melatonin, it's a very controversial topic in sleep research. And I'll tell you the good news first. So there is very strong evidence that melatonin is great for assisting with phase shifts. So when you're traveling, for example, across time zones, and you need to help your body fall asleep before it's typically ready to fall asleep. So, for example, when you travel east, let's say you live in Perth and you need to travel to Melbourne, it gets darker before you're ready for it to get darker. Your body's not going to produce melatonin fast enough to facilitate sleep. So you can supplement exogenous melatonin to help along the way. And there's really great evidence for that. Now, where the evidence gets less clear is when people start to supplement melatonin for general sleep issues and sleep disorders, because it isn't a pill that's just going to solve any problem. Melatonin is a specific solution to a specific mechanism in the brain. And if your sleep disorder or your sleep issue has nothing to do with the production of melatonin, which more often than not is the case, then supplementing exogenous melatonin, while it's not dangerous, it is likely not going to help more than the placebo effect, which, I mean, that can't be understated. You subscribe melatonin to someone, they'll likely find that it helps because of the placebo effect. But whether that's actually helping in these placebo double-blind trials is just doesn't seem to be the case. So my advice would be if you're having a sleep issues, see a specialist, a sleep physician, who will be able to help at least figure out what the main cause of the sleep problem is, and then figure out ways to address that, as opposed to trying something else that doesn't really have the science to back it up. But again, this is not my area of research at all, really. It's just what I've read and what I seem to understand. But again, melatonin supplementation can be great for certain situations that require it. Others, maybe not.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Josh, that's been a fascinating tour de force through this whole topic of sleep. I really appreciate the way you've tackled this. It's been very logical, and I can see, you're doing incredibly well with research and thank you for making such a big contribution to this field. Can you tell me what you're working on now? Where's the future for you in this?
So we've just started a new study in collaboration with the WuSci Human Performance Alliance out of Stanford University. And we're tracking the sleep and performance of a female basketball team here in Melbourne. And this is a longitudinal study, so we're going to follow them across the season and then across the off season, and again the season after that, looking at how they deal with certain sleep and circadian obstacles. They often travel to Perth and back, and to Queensland and back. And then in the second season, we're going to implement a sleep regularity intervention to try to improve their sleep and see if that has positive consequences on their performance and also their mental health, their well-being, and that kind of thing. So that's one part of what we're working on at the moment. I'm also still doing a lot of work looking at exercise and sleep and sleep regularity and variability. These are ideas that I'm extremely fascinated by, whether the variability of sleep. We know that variability in sleep is bad, but there are different ways to get to the same level of variability. So does the pattern matter? So if you sleep consistently during the week, but then you go all over the place on the weekend, is that different to having small amounts of variability throughout a 7-day period? These types of things are what's keeping me interested at the moment. And ideally what I want to get to is looking at routine and how that affects health. I think routine is the most important thing in the world. I've spoken a lot about sleep regularity. I also think exercise regularity is important, light regularity, meal timings, the things that you're eating, this kind of thing. It's been really difficult to study this in the past. I think coming to a point where we can have a better understanding of lifestyle regularity and how important the different facets of this are, facets of lifestyle regularity are on different health outcomes, is really the final frontier. So that's what I'm trying to work towards to eventually live in a more routine world. And hopefully I can be a small part of that.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and great success going forward. Wish you all the best. Really nice to have had you as a guest today. Thank you so much, Josh.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you. Well, thank you for joining me in the conversation with Josh on sleep. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have. Certainly have learned a lot more about sleep hygiene. And although it's not my primary clinical practice to advise patients on sleep, I now have some great tools with which to advise patients who are indeed struggling with sleep patterns. Well, during the podcast series, we'll be covering a wide range of topics across many specialty interests. The discussions are not intended as specific medical advice for patients, but as general information only and reflect the opinions of the guests interviewed. Requests for new topics to be reviewed and comments about the conversation you've listened to are welcomed, and maybe email to manager@gihealth.com.au.